Have you ever wondered what a woman in the Middle Ages actually did all day? Was her life like the fairy tales we grew up with? All lace and roses, gallant knights, and happily ever afters? Well, not quite. Tonight, I invite you to set aside those glittering images of proud princesses in tall towers and shining swordsmen on horseback. Because reality, as it often does, tells a quieter, stranger, and, dare I say, much sleepier story. Let's slip through the soft folds of time. Back to a world where the clanging of knives on wooden boards, the slow creak of a heavy grain mill, and the gentle rhythm of weaving looms were the true soundtrack of daily life. Tonight we're not chasing dragons or breaking curses. We're discovering a quiet secret. The real lives of ordinary medieval women. The ones who didn't wear crowns or ride horses into battle, but who kept the whole world turning. One loaf of bread, one pot of stew, and one stitch at a time. So snuggle in. Let the past whisper to you through the steam of a cooking pot, through the flicker of candlelight on rough stone walls, and drift gently into a simpler world, where being just a woman was anything but simple. Tonight's tale is made up of 8 cozy chapters. So, if you're nestled under a blanket with a cup of warm tea in hand, or simply lying in bed, waiting for sleep to arrive, let us begin this gentle journey into the quiet, remarkable life of a medieval woman. Chapter 1. Dawn on the Farm. Before the rooster even thinks about crowing, she's already up. In this chapter, we follow the very first footsteps of a farmer's wife, as she begins her day in the pre-dawn stillness. From feeding the livestock, gathering herbs, to preparing the first meal of the day, everything has a rhythm, a purpose, and a surprising kind of peace. It's work, yes, but it's also the heartbeat of the home. Chapter 2. The Center of the Household. Here we peek into the kitchen, the warmest and busiest room of any medieval home. The woman of the house is the quiet commander of survival. Cooking traditional meals, preserving food for long winters, baking bread with practiced hands. These aren't just chores. These are sacred rituals, the kind that keep everyone alive and well-fed, with a little extra for the neighbors, just in case. Chapter 3. Sewing, Weaving, and the Art of Clever Hands. Needles, thread, and looms. This chapter celebrates the artistry of fabric. She doesn't just stitch clothes, she weaves identity. Dresses for daughters, tunics for sons, and sometimes fine cloth to trade or sell. Her creativity is in every fiber, and in every patch sewn onto a well-worn sleeve. Chapter 4. Planting and Gathering. Now let's walk into the garden where she grows more than just vegetables. From leafy greens to healing herbs, she cultivates the earth like a gentle alchemist. What she grows feeds the family and heals them too. With every harvest basket she gathers food, medicine, and a little bit of quiet wisdom. Chapter 5. Health and Folk Wisdom. She might not wear a doctor's robe, but make no mistake, she's the family's healer. This chapter uncovers the woman's role as the guardian of traditional knowledge. From mixing herbal remedies to calming fevers with nothing but a cool cloth and a song, her care is rooted in generations of quiet, intuitive skill. Chapter 6. Life within the village. No woman is an island, not even in the Middle Ages. In this chapter we explore the village where bonds are strong and gossip is stronger. Women gather not just to help one another but to laugh, share, teach, and build the threads of community. They are the keepers of stories, the first teachers, and sometimes the unofficial town council. Chapter 7. From Peasant to Noble. Not all women wore aprons, some wore silk. Here we gently compare the lives of peasant women and noble ladies. Their days look different, yes. Gardens versus great halls, chores versus courtly duties, but both bore responsibilities that shaped families, fortunes, and even politics. Spoiler alert, neither had much time to rest. Chapter 8. Their Legacy. At last, we arrive at the quiet yet powerful legacy of medieval women. This final chapter looks back at all they contributed, not with swords or speeches, but with hands that healed, hearts that held families together, and wisdom that shaped generations. Though often left out of history books, their impact is stitched into the very fabric of society. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift gently, let the whisper of woven cloth, the scent of herbs, and the rhythm of ancient footsteps lull you into the stillness of sleep. Good night, dear listener. And may you dream in soft candlelight and the quiet strength of women long past. Let's not keep you waiting any longer. We'll begin right away. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable. Take a deep breath. And let's gently wander into Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Dawn on the Farm. In this chapter, we'll step quietly into the very first moments of a day on a peaceful little farm. Before the sun even dares peek over the hills, a woman, our farmer, has already begun her day. Yes, while the world is still dreaming, she's up and about, tending to the livestock, gathering what nature offers, and preparing the very first meal of the day. It's not glamorous work, but it's the kind that hums with purpose. The kind that smells of warm hay, fresh herbs, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of sleepy cows. So snuggle in, as we follow her slow and steady rhythm. And let the quiet beauty of this farm morning carry us gently into the story, and maybe, just maybe, into sleep. Part 1. When the sun was still sleeping. Before the first rays of sunlight could slip through the leaves. Long before birds chirped their morning songs. A medieval woman's day had already begun. You see, back then they didn't need alarm clocks. No buzzing phones, no snooze buttons. Their wake-up call? A rooster with serious vocal ambitions. And the chilly kiss of early morning dew brushing against their skin. Life in the Middle Ages was, well, earthy. Deeply rooted in soil, livestock, and a rhythm of labor that never really stopped. Each day started before dawn, not to scroll social media or sip artisanal coffee, but to prepare the household and brace for whatever challenge the new day might toss their way. Now let's imagine one of these women. Her name is Anya. She lives in a cozy little cottage, roofed with thatch and filled with the scent of wood smoke. As soon as that determined rooster lets out his morning solo, Anya is already on her feet, shaking off the straw from her bed. There are no light switches. No hot showers waiting. The first task of the day? Making fire. She carefully nudges the embers left over from the night before, blowing gently, coaxing them back to life. If they've gone cold, well, it's time for flint and steel. Starting a fire from scratch isn't exactly romantic. It's a smoky, stubborn ritual requiring both patience and skill. But that fire? It's more than just warmth. It's life. As the flame flickers to life, it casts a soft glow across her tiny kitchen. It's time to make breakfast. Nothing fancy here, perhaps some oat porridge? Or a slice of dense, chewy bread made from rye. Simple, hearty food to fuel a day of honest, back-breaking work. Outside, the animals are already singing their morning chorus. A pig grunts impatiently. A cow bellows in protest. They're hungry, and they don't care that Anya hasn't had her porridge yet. Caring for livestock wasn't optional. Most families didn't own grand herds. Just a few chickens, maybe a pig or two. And if they were lucky, a milk cow. Each morning, Anya would milk the cow, feed the pigs, and gently gather warm eggs from the coop. That milk would later become butter and cheese, precious foods that kept well over time. The eggs? Packed with protein and deeply appreciated. Every single one felt like a small miracle laid in straw. It was a life of repetition, yes, but there was a quiet joy in that routine. For women like Anya, each small act, each egg collected, each fire lit, was a thread in the larger tapestry of survival. And in those quiet, rhythmic tasks, they found not only purpose, but a certain kind of peace. Part 2. The grinding stone and the scent of bread. As the light of day grew stronger, Anya's work carried on, steadily, quietly, like the rhythm of the earth itself. She stepped into the little kitchen where a humble stone mill awaited. No fancy machinery here, just a simple weathered grinding stone and Anya's capable hands. Each day she ground grains of wheat or barley into fine flour. The sound of the stone wheel scraping over grain, heavy, steady, and endlessly patient, filled the room. It was the sound of life, of nourishment. A soft, gravelly lullaby of survival. Now, grinding flour might sound like a tedious chore, and, well, it was, but it was also an art. The flour had to be smooth, free of any impurities. Not too coarse, not too fine. Just right so that it could become the kind of bread that doesn't just fill the belly but fills the heart too. Once the flour was ready, it was time for the next sacred ritual, kneading and baking. Bread, you see, wasn't just food. It was the foundation of every meal, the backbone of the table. A single loaf could be shared with a slice of cheese, a handful of herbs, or, on particularly indulgent days, dipped in a bit of lard. Simple? Yes. Delicious? Often. Essential? Always. Now, don't picture a modern oven with buttons and beeps. No, Anya baked her bread the old-fashioned way, on heated stones or inside a basic clay oven. She had no thermometer, no timer. She watched the color of the crust, felt the heat with her hands, and relied on skills passed down through generations of equally determined women. But of course, a woman's work didn't end with a single loaf of bread. There were other meals to prepare, humble, hearty things. Maybe a pot of root vegetable stew, flavored with a bit of salted pork. Or a barley soup, simmered slowly with care and quiet hope. Every dish had to be carefully thought out. Not just for taste, but for survival. Especially when the long, harsh winters came knocking. And through it all, every stir of the pot, every handful of grain, every gentle press of dough, Anya worked without recipes, without measurements. Just experience. Just instinct. Just love. The sound of the grinding stone wasn't merely noise. It was the heartbeat of the home. The whisper of resilience. And each loaf that emerged from Anya's oven was more than bread. It was proof. Proof of endurance. Of strength. Of a quiet, steadfast power that asked for nothing, yet gave everything. Part 3. Hospitality and the Art of Sharing. As the day drifted into its quieter hours, and the bubbling pots in the kitchen began to settle, Anya's hands were, miraculously, still not idle. You see, medieval women like her were rarely done for the day. Sometimes she might step outside to lend a hand to her husband. Nothing too dramatic, just a bit of seed sowing or coaxing weeds out of the soil one stubborn root at a time. But more often than not, this was a time reserved for something a little more social. Because despite what we may imagine, medieval life wasn't isolated. Far from it, actually. Villagers lived close together, and community life was woven tightly like a well-used basket. Helping each other out wasn't a bonus, it was simply how things worked. And in this lively little web of hay roofs and smoke chimneys, the women were, without a doubt, the keepers of connection. They'd gather by the riverbank to do laundry, scrubbing, chatting, and sharing the latest gossip in between rinses. They foraged together, picking mushrooms from the forest floor, often pretending they knew exactly which ones wouldn't cause hallucinations or worse. Or they simply sat together, knees tucked under skirts, trading recipes, garden tips, and the occasional story about someone's pig going missing, again. These weren't just idle afternoons. These moments were the threads that stitched the village together. Through laughter and advice they shared not just information but warmth. And when guests arrived, because even in the Middle Ages someone was always popping by, it was the women who answered the door first. With a quick tidy-up, usually more symbolic than thorough, and whatever ingredients they could gather, they pulled together the best meal they could muster. A warm loaf of bread. A steaming bowl of soup. Simple, yes, but always made with heart. Hospitality, you see, wasn't about abundance. It was about generosity. Even when supplies were tight, and they often were, these women gave what they had. It was their way of saying, "You are welcome here. We may not have silver spoons, but we do have kindness." And then, as the day melted into twilight, another duty called, perhaps the most sacred of all, storytelling. Because long before bedtime podcasts, there were bedtime mothers. Women like Anya were the village's living libraries. They passed down folk tales, whispered stories of saints, brave warriors, and magical beasts, all from memory, embroidered with personal flair. Sometimes the tale came in the form of a lullaby. Other times it was just a simple story meant to teach, about kindness, courage, or why you really shouldn't steal apples from the Abbey garden. In a world with no schools, these women were the first teachers, the first philosophers, and the first voices their children ever trusted. And so, with soup ladles washed and stories told, Anya would finally rest her tired hands, until the sun rose again, and the whole gentle rhythm would begin anew. Part 4. Weathering the Storms of Life. A life in the Middle Ages. You might picture it as a quiet, simple rhythm of farm chores and church bells. But for a medieval peasant woman, well, it was anything but easy. Sure, the days may have felt repetitive. Wake up, feed the animals, tend the crops, cook the porridge, repeat. But beneath that routine lay a world full of challenges. Illnesses, failed harvests, and the ever-present whims of nature were constant companions. Health, fragile at best. A small cut could become a serious infection. A common cold? Well, that might lead to something much worse. And doctors? Oh no, my friend. Most peasant women had to be their own doctors, their families' healers. Armed with herbs and the kind of wisdom passed down from grandmothers to mothers to daughters, they brewed teas, made poultices, and whispered ancient remedies like secrets to the wind. They weren't just wives and mothers, they were the village's unofficial witch doctors, minus the broomsticks. When a child fell ill, it was often the mother who stayed up all night, not sleeping, not eating, just watching, praying, and wiping tiny foreheads with trembling hands. Her strength? Quiet. Her love? Immeasurable. Then there were the failed harvests, the kind of years that turned dreams into dust. When the crops refused to grow, hunger crept in like a cold wind under the door. And in those bleak times the women didn't despair, well, maybe just a little. But mostly they got to work. Into the forest they went, foraging for roots, berries, mushrooms, anything remotely edible and hopefully not poisonous. They worked harder than ever, storing whatever they could to survive the long, unforgiving winter. Their endurance was something to behold, resilient as oak trees, tender as wildflowers. And then, at the end of it all, after the cows had been milked, the children tucked in, and the fire stoked for the night, you'd find someone like Anya, sitting quietly by the hearth. The firelight danced across her face, tracing every line etched by time and toil. Maybe she'd pick up a bit of needlework, threading her hopes into the fabric one tiny stitch at a time. In that faint glow, every thread became a soft promise, to herself, to her children, to tomorrow. You see, life for a woman in the Middle Ages wasn't just about surviving. It was about holding everything together, the home, the heart, the hope. They were warriors of the everyday. Not with swords or shields, but with aprons, ladles, and lullabies. With worn hands and stubborn souls, they kept the flame alive, not just of life, but of love and of something more enduring, hope. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, think of Anya by the fire. Her quiet strength, her soft humming, her dreams stitched into cloth. And know that even in the hardest of times, there was warmth, there was love, and always just a little bit of light. And now let us gently drift into Chapter 2, The Heart of the Home. Ah yes, the kitchen, the true throne room of the household. In this chapter, we explore the timeless role of the woman as the keeper of the hearth. She wasn't just cooking meals, oh no. She was preparing traditional dishes passed down through generations, each recipe a warm whisper from the past. She stocked up food for the cold, hungry winters, like a squirrel but far more organized. And she baked bread. Lots and lots of bread. These weren't just chores. They were acts of survival, of love, of strategy. Because, let's face it, without bread, a family might just fall apart at the seams. So sit back. Let your thoughts wander to the gentle sound of kneading dough, the crackling of a warm fire, and the quiet power of the hands that fed a home. Part 1. The Art of Medieval Cooking. As the sun climbed higher and the early morning chores were put to rest, the attention of a medieval woman shifted naturally toward the hearth. If the home was the heart of the family, then the fire was its heartbeat, and she, the one who kept that rhythm steady. Now, don't imagine towering chef hats or Michelin stars. Medieval cooking was an art, yes, but not the kind with saffron foams or 12-step recipes. It was the kind born of necessity, intuition, and a deep respect for whatever the garden, the cellar, or the forest decided to offer that day. Let's return to Anya. She's standing before a large pot, one of those big iron cauldrons dangling above a crackling fire. Inside, a bubbling medley of garden vegetables, a few chunks of salted pork from last winter, and barley, hearty, humble barley. Exotic spices? Not in this kitchen. Instead, Anya reached for thyme and rosemary growing wild just outside the door, and a precious pinch of salt. She seasoned her meals not with exact measurements but with experience, and perhaps more importantly with the memory of what made her husband smile and what her children wouldn't pick out and leave behind. Cooking for her was never just about food. It was a matter of survival, of keeping everyone strong enough to toil through fields, forests, and freezing winds. Thick soups and dark rye bread were staples. But each season whispered its own flavors. In summer, fresh greens and berries. In winter, it was down to salted, smoked, or dried provisions that had to stretch across months. Each meal was a quiet triumph, a testament to her creativity, the nimbleness of her fingers, and the quiet strength of her mind. Medieval women were the unsung inventors of many new dishes. They transformed the toughest cuts of meat into warming stews and pickled root vegetables into bursts of flavor. These meals didn't just feed bellies, they carried the warmth of love, the spirit of sharing, and the soul of a home. Part 2. Storing food, guarding life itself. The medieval woman's secret weapon against winter. Now, dear listener, picture a quiet medieval village nestled between rolling hills, where the leaves have just begun to turn golden and crisp. A slight chill rides the breeze. And in this calm, ancient rhythm of the seasons, a quiet urgency begins to stir. You see, one of the most important roles of a medieval woman wasn't embroidering or fending off dragons. No, it was making sure that her family didn't starve or freeze when winter rolled in like an uninvited guest who eats everything and refuses to leave. Food storage wasn't just a chore. It was a full-blown battle. A battle against hunger, against frost, against mold, and sometimes, against rats with very bold personalities. By autumn, just as the last sheaves of grain were being gathered, women like Anya, our soft-spoken village heroine, would leap, gently amble, into action. Together with the other women of the village, she'd begin the serious business of salting meat, pickling vegetables, and drying herbs and roots. Pork was sliced into hefty chunks, salted generously, then hung above the hearth, where the smoke from daily fires would slowly preserve it. Cabbages and turnips, those loyal, humble friends of winter, were shredded, salted, and packed tightly into large clay jars. Fermentation, though not glamorous, was a kind of alchemy. Done right, it meant tangy pickles and healthy bellies. Done wrong, well, let's just say the family might get a surprise they didn't order. Grains were another story. Wheat and barley, precious and finicky, were stored in great wooden barrels tucked away in cool, dry cellars. These women knew the importance of airflow and vigilance. Mold and mice were not welcome guests, and every now and then someone would go down with a lantern to check on the barrels like they were visiting old friends. Each grain stored with care was a quiet promise. A promise of full bellies, warm fires, and fewer grumpy husbands come January. But this work wasn't done alone. Oh no. Food preservation was very much a team sport. Women would gather, exchange their favorite techniques, perhaps arguing over how long to brine cabbage before sealing the jar, or which kind of wood smoke gave the best flavor to bacon. These gatherings were filled with laughter, gossip, and the occasional complaint about sore hands and stubborn turnips. And in these humble exchanges, they wove something more lasting than even their smoked ham or fermented vegetables. A sense of community. A net of support. A sisterhood against the cold. So the next time you reach for a jar of pickles or a slice of cured meat, give a little nod to Anya and her medieval sisters. They weren't just preserving food. They were preserving life, with salt, patience, and just a touch of stubborn genius. Part 3. Bread making, the soul of the meal. As we gently mentioned in the previous chapter, bread making was not just a daily chore, it was, in many ways, the heart and soul of the entire meal. Each humble loaf of bread was more than just food. It was a symbol of life itself. Of fullness, of warmth, and of something that felt just right. Now let's watch as Anya begins her day. She starts by kneading the dough. Not with a machine, of course, but with her own hands, patient, careful, and strong. The dough is usually made from wheat or barley flour. Sometimes she might mix in a little legume flour or some rye, just for that extra nutritional touch. Very thoughtful, our Anya. The kneading itself is no quick task. Oh no, it's a labor of love. She must press, stretch, fold, and repeat, again and again, until the dough becomes silky smooth with that gentle bounce that tells her, it's ready. like taming a soft, flowery animal that just wants to be hugged. Once it's had time to rest and rise, just like us on a sleepy afternoon, Anya shapes the dough into soft, round discs. Not too thick, not too thin. Then she places them into the oven. But don't imagine a shiny metal box with knobs and dials. No, no. Her oven might be a simple clay dome, or just a few heated stones arranged just right. She must tend the fire with care, no thermometer here. Just instinct and experience. She gauges the heat by feeling the air, the scent of smoke, the whisper of the flames. Too hot and the bread burns. Too cool and it stays stubbornly raw. It's a dance between fire and dough, one that only years of practice can perfect. And then, that moment, the smell begins to rise. That warm, earthy scent of fresh-baked bread wafts through the home. There is, perhaps, no fragrance more comforting in the world. It smells like safety, like being held, like home. When the bread is done, golden, warm, and perfect, it's stored with care. One loaf can last for days. And it is not just a side dish. It is the dish, the anchor of every meal. Bread making, you see, was not merely a task. It was a ritual. A quiet, daily ceremony of gratitude, for the grains harvested with sweat and patience. For the gift of nourishment. For the chance to sit together, share and feel full, in more ways than one. Part 4. Rising above expectations. Sometimes, people assume that the lives of medieval women were all about cooking stews and scrubbing wooden floors. Just endless chores and nothing more. But oh, how wrong they are. In reality, these women were nothing short of brilliant managers, running entire households with a quiet kind of strength that rarely made it into the history books. They kept their families alive, fed, and functioning, all while carrying the weight of social expectations that often didn't see them for who they truly were. You see, in a time when society was run mostly by men and for men, the work of women was often dismissed as just women's work. Not worth recording. Not worth remembering. But let's pause for a moment and imagine. Without someone like Anya, who would cook the meals? Who would store the grain for winter? Who would bandage scraped knees and keep the fire going when the cold crept in? Medieval society, for all its castles and knights and cathedrals, simply wouldn't have survived without the quiet contributions of women like her. And these women weren't just hard workers, they were thinkers, planners, silent strategists. They had to calculate how much food would be needed for the whole year. They had to remember what their grandmothers taught them, and then pass that wisdom along to their daughters. They built the foundation of society not with stone or sword, but with skill, resilience, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. No, the lives of medieval women weren't fairy tales filled with glass slippers and tiaras. Their stories were more like quiet epics, of endurance, of care, and of sacrifice. They were ordinary women. But their contributions? Anything but ordinary. Can you feel it? The strength in a single loaf of bread. The devotion simmering in a pot of soup. The hope tucked away in a cellar full of grain. These weren't just meals. They were love. They were survival. They were the quiet, steady heartbeat of the medieval world. And now, dear listener, let us quietly drift onward to Chapter 3, Needle and Shuttle, the handcrafted masterpieces. Let us step gently into the world of fabric and thread. Ah yes, the soothing rhythm of weaving, the quiet concentration of stitching by candlelight. You see, the women of the past weren't merely making clothes for their families, though that alone was quite the task. They were also crafting fine textiles. Beautiful, intricate pieces that could be traded, gifted, or even sold at the local market. Every thread was a tiny expression of patience. Every pattern whispered of creativity. And those humble hands? Well, they were the original fashion designers, long before runways, hashtags, or fast fashion. So let's pause for a moment and imagine the soft rustle of linen, the gentle clink of the loom, and the warm satisfaction of creating something with love and skill. Isn't it comforting? How much care and art can be found in something as simple as a piece of cloth? Part 1. Flax and wool, the soft threads of medieval life. After a long day of heavy work in the kitchen, hauling pots, stoking fires, and perhaps chasing a goose or two, a medieval woman would move on to a different kind of hard work. This time it was quieter, gentler, and required not brute strength, but skill and patience, sewing and weaving. Now, don't let the peaceful rhythm of the spinning wheel fool you. This wasn't just a hobby. It was art. It was survival. It was economy. From coarse flax stalks and tufts of warm sheep's wool, these women created fabric, real fabric. The kind that clothed their families and warmed them through long winters. Let us picture Anya for a moment. She's sitting on a simple wooden stool, a bit creaky perhaps, spinning wool in her hands with quiet focus. Her fingers move deftly, pulling soft strands from a pile of sheep's fleece. But this fleece didn't magically appear out of nowhere. No. First, the sheep had to be sheared, a springtime job involving sweat, strength, and a surprisingly opinionated sheep. Then came washing the fleece to remove the dust, dirt, and natural oils, an activity that was less than glamorous. Next, the wool needed to be carded, brushed thoroughly until the fibers lay smooth and straight like a well-behaved choir. Only then could Anya spin it into fine, strong thread using a humble hand spindle or spinning wheel. Each twist a gentle dance of coordination and care. As for flax, the story was just as elaborate. The plant had to be harvested, dried, soaked, and then, essentially beaten and broken down, all to extract the fine fibers hidden inside. These fibers were then combed, spun, and twisted into linen thread, soft, strong, and slightly scratchy on Tuesdays. All of this was done by hand. No machines. No shortcuts. Just determination, a bit of elbow grease, and hands that told the story of labor, calloused, sure, but also proud. And through it all, there was something almost magical. You see, spinning wasn't just a chore. It was a time for gathering. Women would often sit together, spinning and chatting, swapping tips, telling stories, laughing about husbands who couldn't even sew a button if their life depended on it. These moments became small sanctuaries, spaces filled with laughter, connection, and the quiet hum of creation. And perhaps, if you listen closely now as you rest your head on your pillow, you might still hear the faint spinning of thread, the soft laughter of Anya and her friends, and the comforting whisper of wool turning into warmth. Part 2, The Loom and the Woven Dreams. And now, dear listener, after spinning the thread, comes the next quiet adventure, weaving the cloth. You see, in most humble farming homes there stood, sometimes creaking, sometimes proudly still, a simple wooden loom. Not just a tool, mind you, but a lifelong companion, especially for the women of the household. It stood there through the seasons, through laughter and long sighs, holding the threads of daily life together, quite literally. There, in the soft morning light, sits Anya. She settles onto her stool, the loom before her like an old friend. The vertical threads, the warp, are already stretched tight and ready. With practiced hands, she picks up the shuttle, wound with horizontal thread, and sends it darting through. Left to right. Right to left. Click-clack. Click-clack. The loom begins its gentle song, like a sleepy metronome in a quiet room. Every pass of the shuttle weaves a new line, a new path. A new patch of fabric slowly comes into being. It's not fast work, no. Nor is it forgiving. One tiny mistake and the cloth may come out crooked or worse, have to be unraveled and begun again. And no one wants that. But Anya, with her steady breath and nimble fingers, weaves on. Now, these woven pieces weren't just for clothing the family, though that was certainly important. Oh no, these fabrics had many destinies. They'd become warm blankets, crisp bed linens, sturdy towels, and even the occasional potato sack. Yes, even those deserve craftsmanship. And sometimes, when the fabric came out particularly fine, it would be taken to the village market. There, it could be traded for a pinch of salt, a handful of spices, or a tool or two. In this way, the loom wasn't just a wooden frame, it was also a quiet little business partner helping put food on the table. But perhaps the most beautiful part was this. As she wove, Anya wasn't only crafting cloth. She was weaving something much softer, hopes and dreams. In each thread, a silent wish, for her children to be warm in winter, for her husband to sleep soundly beneath a soft blanket, for a home filled with comfort, even in the simplest ways. Every line of weaving was a whisper of love, a patient blessing, a careful act of care for the people she held most dear. Part 3, Needles, Thread, and a Dash of Creativity. Boring but beautiful tales of everyday life, to fall asleep to. Now that the cloth has been woven and folded, it's time for the next quiet act in our sleepy little tale, sewing. This is the moment when the women, our silent heroines of the home, begin their quiet artistry. With only a needle and some thread, they bring fabric to life. But don't imagine fashion runways or glittery gowns. Oh no. We're talking about shirts that fit, dresses that don't fall apart, and pants that can survive a good day's work in the mud. Take Anya for example. She sews shirts for her husband and dresses for her children, all by hand. Yes, that's right. No sewing machine, no buzzing electric noise. Just the soft rhythm of needle through fabric, stitch after careful stitch. She cuts the cloth, joins the pieces, and patches up any holes that dare to appear. In this world, mending clothes isn't a hobby, it's a survival skill. A single shirt might be mended and remended until it has more history than the family dog. And when even patches can no longer save it, well, then maybe it becomes a cleaning rag. Maybe. But Anya isn't just sewing, she's decorating too. A little flower embroidered here, a bird over there. Sometimes a cheerful geometric swirl for good measure. Tiny details that bring a touch of joy to the otherwise simple and practical garments. Tablecloths might get a new edge. Pillowcases a little surprise. These decorations aren't just cute, they're comforting. They whisper, someone cared enough to make this beautiful. And sewing isn't just about clothing. It's about connection. Mothers pass these skills to their daughters, not just as chores but as pieces of identity. How to spin thread, how to weave cloth, how to make something out of almost nothing. In this world, a girl who can sew is deeply admired, not because she's trendy but because she's capable, reliable. The kind of woman who can keep a household running even when times are hard. And let's face it, times are usually hard. So as the candle flickers and Anya pulls the final stitch of the day, there's a quiet kind of pride in the air. A handmade kind of love. Nothing flashy. Just simple, beautiful endurance, stitched into every seam. Part 4, The Forgotten Beauty. A history. When we look back through its dusty pages, what do we usually see? Battles. Brave knights clanging swords. Mighty kings sitting sternly on very uncomfortable-looking thrones. So much noise, so much power. But very little space for the quiet, everyday women who held the world together in ways that didn't make it into the headlines or the history books. You see, no one writes epic poems about sewing a sturdy tunic. No bard ever sang a ballad about the brave woman who mended socks for 12 children. But perhaps they should have. Because behind every woolen cloak and linen curtain, there was a pair of hands, calloused, gentle, determined. Spinning thread, weaving fabric, stitching love into the seams of daily life. These women didn't wield swords. They wielded needles. They didn't build castles. But they made the curtains, the blankets, the very clothes that warmed the kings and comforted the knights. And that's no small thing. Just imagine, no clothes to protect us from the cold, no soft linens to make a house feel like home. Without them, life would have been much more drafty. And honestly quite itchy. Their work, often dismissed as small or ordinary, was in truth quietly magnificent. They turned raw, unremarkable materials into something useful, beautiful, even sacred. Repetition became rhythm. Routine became ritual. Labor became art. The cloth they wove wasn't just fabric, it was made of whispers, of care, of sacrifice. Each tiny stitch, a love letter in thread. Each finished piece, a tapestry of hope, skill, and devotion. They were artists. Artists who painted not with colors but with patience and purpose. Their masterpieces didn't hang in galleries. They hung on clotheslines. They lay folded in chests, passed down through generations. No, their lives weren't fairy tales. They didn't end with a royal wedding and a triumphant trumpet sound. Their stories were quieter, but no less heroic. They lived an epic of endurance, a ballad of care. They kept the fire of life burning, not with glory, but with love. So tonight, as you rest your head and let your eyes grow heavy, perhaps you'll feel it, the strength of those forgotten hands, woven into every blanket, every seam, every stitch. It wasn't just clothing they made, it was comfort, was hope. It was the warm, gentle legacy of women who stitched the world together, one thread at a time. And now let us gently wander into Chapter 4 of Gardening and Gathering. Ah yes, the quiet art of coaxing life from the soil. In this chapter we shall explore the often overlooked but utterly vital role of women in the age-old practices of gardening, planting vegetables, nurturing herbs, and gathering fruits from trees heavy with nature's kindness. These weren't merely hobbies or pastimes. No. This was serious business, the kind that kept bellies full and colds at bay. Whether it was a plump tomato for supper or a sprig of mint to soothe an upset stomach, the garden was both pantry and pharmacy. So, let us slow down, breathe in the scent of imaginary basil, and pay tribute to the patient hands that turned humble dirt into nourishment. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of magic. Part 1. Gardening, a gift from the earth. As the sun rose higher in the sky and the daily chores around the home were, for the most part, under control, our medieval woman turned her gaze to the humble little garden just outside her door. Now this wasn't just a patch of dirt. Oh no. This was her treasure chest. A source of fresh food, and in a life filled with hardship, a small but precious joy. Gardening, you see, wasn't merely about growing things to eat. It was an art. A dance with nature. A slow, quiet conversation with the seasons. Picture this. Anya kneeling softly on the earth behind her cottage, her hands moving swiftly yet gently, plucking out the stubborn weeds. Her garden wasn't big. In fact, it was quite modest. But it was tidy and thoughtfully arranged, with rows of cabbages, turnips, carrots, and all sorts of beans standing proudly like little green soldiers. She had to prepare the soil early, sow the seeds by hand, water them just right, and care for every tender sprout like it was a tiny miracle. There were no chemical fertilizers, of course. What they used came from, well, let's just say the back end of cows. And a little kitchen ash for good measure. Everything returned to the earth in a natural, sustainable cycle. Nothing wasted. Everything with purpose. And growing food wasn't as simple as throwing seeds and hoping for the best. No. It took skill, an intimate understanding of the weather, the shifting moods of the seasons, and the mysterious rhythms of nature. Anya had to know when to plant and when to harvest, to coax the most life out of every inch of soil. Leafy greens needed more water. Carrots preferred loose, airy soil. None of this was taught in schools, of course. There were no textbooks, just the quiet, steady wisdom passed down through generations. From mothers to daughters, from grandmothers with soft hands and softer voices. In a world where food was more precious than gold, Anya's little garden meant everything. Each carrot she pulled from the ground, each cabbage she cradled in her arms, was not just a meal, but a quiet celebration. A victory of self-sufficiency. It was a bond, deep and unspoken, between her and the land. A kind of reverence for the earth that fed her. And in that garden, beneath the open sky, she wasn't just surviving. She was growing. Part 2. The herb garden and nature's quiet remedies. Now, tucked beside the vegetable patch where cabbages and leeks grew in peace, there was another garden, a quieter one filled not with food but with whispers of old wisdom. This, dear listener, was the herb garden. In the Middle Ages, a woman's herb garden was more than just a patch of green. It was a place of quiet mystery, of healing hands, and of age-old remedies passed gently from grandmother to mother, and from mother to daughter. Take Anya, for example. She wasn't a doctor, not by any formal title, but in her little village she was someone you went to before the fever got too high, or before the cough kept you awake one more night. Anya's herbal patch was modest, just a corner of land behind the house, kissed by the morning sun. There she grew mint, chamomile, basil, and a handful of wild plants that most people would walk right past, unless they were wise like Anya. She knew what each plant could do. Mint for the churning stomachs after too much barley stew. Chamomile for tea that whispered sleep into your bones. Some strange, jagged leaf from the woods? Well, that one stopped bleeding faster than you could say oops. This garden wasn't just for looks. When illness knocked on the wooden door of her cottage, Anya didn't panic. She simply tied back her sleeves, stepped out into the garden, and got to work. If her husband came down with a fever, as husbands occasionally do when they've refused to wear their cloak in the rain, She'd brew a cooling tea with herbs only she dared pluck under the moonlight. If one of the children had a cough that wouldn't quit, she'd mash leaves into a syrup that tasted like earth and patience, served in a spoon big enough to hold a frown and a prayer. There were no medical degrees, no sterile gloves, no fancy Latin names. But there was observation and care. There was tradition. And above all, there was trust in the quiet magic of plants. For women like Anya, growing herbs wasn't just a skill, it was a belief. They felt in their bones that every plant had a spirit. That mint didn't just soothe your belly, it wanted to. That chamomile wasn't just calming, it watched over you as you slept. To them, the herb garden wasn't just a place of green things, it was a sacred apothecary. A soft, sun-dappled cathedral of leaves, where nature hummed its lullabies, and the secrets of healing lived quietly among the roots. So if tonight, dear listener, you feel a little restless, perhaps imagine yourself walking through Anya's garden. Brush your fingers over the mint, lean close to the chamomile blossoms, breathe in the quiet. And let the herbs do what they've always done, help us rest, heal, and, eventually, sleep. Part 3. Foraging, a surprise gift from the forest. Now, gardening was only half the story when it came to putting food on the table. For the medieval woman, wandering into the woods to forage was just as essential, perhaps even a little more exciting. You see, the forest was no ordinary backdrop. It was a treasure chest. A wild, whispering realm of surprise gifts that no tidy garden could ever hope to offer. In the warm breath of summer and the golden hush of autumn, Anya and the other village women would gather their baskets, tie on their scarves, and head off into the woods together. There, among the ferns and twisting trees, they would search for wild berries, tiny forest strawberries, tart raspberries, curious mushrooms, and crunchy little nuts. It was a kind of outdoor treasure hunt, except instead of gold, they were after things you could eat, or at least hopefully eat. Because, and here's the important bit, not everything in the forest was friendly. Some berries looked like nature's candy but turned out to be more of a death sentence in disguise. So yes, being a skilled forager meant knowing which berries would make a lovely jam, and which ones would make your neighbors come to your funeral. And speaking of jam, those berries didn't just get eaten on the spot. Oh no. They were turned into jams and juices, dried and preserved, carefully stored for the colder months. Mushrooms made their way into soups or were hung to dry like little umbrellas waiting for a rainy day. These forage treats didn't just add color and taste to the medieval table. They brought vitamins, minerals, and a much-needed bit of joy. But here's the thing, it wasn't just about food. Foraging was also about bonding. As they wandered through the woods, the women would chat, tell stories, laugh, maybe gossip a little. It was a break from the chores, a breath of fresh air, quite literally. A little adventure. A chance to connect with one another and with nature. And when times got tough, when crops failed, when granaries were bare, the forest didn't turn its back. It opened its arms. In those hard years, foraging became a lifeline. The women, with their sharp eyes and sharper instincts, could turn leaves and roots into supper and famine into survival. They weren't just gathering food. They were gathering life. So next time you take a walk in the woods, think of Anya and her basket, scanning the underbrush with the focus of a hawk and the heart of a homemaker. Because while kings ruled kingdoms, it was women like her who quietly kept their families, and their villages, alive. Part 4. The Greatness of the Small Things. A tale not of battles or kings but of gardens and gentle hands. These days we think of gardening and foraging as quaint little hobbies. Something to do on the weekends, perhaps while wearing a floppy hat and sipping herbal tea. But for the medieval woman, oh no, my dear listener. For her, these were not hobbies. These were acts of survival. With bare hands and unwavering spirit, she turned stubborn soil into food. She wandered into the whispering woods, not for a stroll, but to gather healing herbs and ancient secrets hidden beneath the leaves. These women didn't wield swords or sit on thrones. They held families together, with soup, with salves, and with simple, quiet strength. The lush green garden beds, the shy wildflowers peeking through the grass, the herbs hanging to dry in the cottage kitchen, all were her masterpieces. No degree, no titles. Just a deep, tender love for her kin, and an uncanny knack for knowing which leaf would cure a fever. Perhaps history forgot their names. But it did not forget their legacy. They left us something far more precious than fame, a gentle reminder that greatness doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes, greatness is found in the smallest of things. To be great is not only to conquer empires, but to rise again and again to meet the small, quiet struggles of each day. To nourish, to heal, to tend, to endure. Can you feel it? The quiet strength of these women, resting in each seed they sowed, in every herb they gathered, in the crunch of leaves beneath their feet as they moved through the woods at dusk. These were not chores. These were their love letters, their hopes, their quiet defiance. Each act, an offering of care, from a woman to her family. And now let us gently drift into Chapter 5, Health and the Quiet Wisdom of Folk Remedies. In the soft glow of lamplight and the hush of old kitchens, we find the true healers of the home. Yes, dear listener, we're talking about the women who, without any formal titles or certificates, quietly became the doctors of the everyday. From steeping herbs in boiling water to rubbing strange-smelling balms onto tiny chests, they knew just what to do when a child had a cough, or when grandpa's knees refused to cooperate again. They carried with them generations of whispered knowledge, remedies passed down not in books, but through gentle hands and quiet observation. A bit of ginger for the stomach, some wild mint for the nerves, and always the magic of a warm meal and a soft voice. They were the guardians of balance, nurses without uniforms, herbalists without labels, and perhaps the most underrated scientists of all. So let's take a deep breath and give them the quiet applause they so richly deserve. Part 1. The Healer of the Household. In a world where hospitals didn't exist, where white coats and stethoscopes were not even a dream, there she was, the woman of the house, quietly holding it all together. She was the family's doctor, nurse, and pharmacist, all rolled into one. Without degrees, without prescriptions, without so much as a thermometer. Armed instead with a handful of herbs, a head full of wisdom, and a heart big enough to hold everyone's pain. It was her quiet duty to guard her family's health, to soothe the baby's fever, tend to the elders' aching bones, and patch up whatever the world threw their way. With nothing but what nature offered and what her mother once taught her. No pressure, right? Picture this. Anya sits beside her daughter, who's coughing and hot with fever. No paracetamol, no antibiotics. But she's calm. She heads to her little garden, her pharmacy under the sky, and picks a few mint leaves, maybe a sprig of thyme, then brews a warm tea with honey. Not too hot, not too cold. Just right to soothe a sore throat and ease a worried heart. She places a cool herbal compress gently on her child's forehead. She hums a soft tune. And she waits. Now, don't be fooled by her simple tools. These women, they were walking encyclopedias of medicinal plants. They knew which leaves eased pain, which roots helped you sleep, and which bitter bark could stop a bleeding wound. Need a healing balm? They'd mix leftover tea leaves with pork fat. Yes, pork fat. And voila, you've got yourself a wound salve. Need something to restore strength after an illness? Try a tonic brewed from the root of a tree whose name no one can pronounce anymore. But trust me, it worked. And where was this knowledge written? Nowhere. No textbooks. No diagrams. Just words whispered from grandmother to mother, from mother to daughter, like an unbroken chain of quiet power. So whenever someone in the family fell ill, it wasn't the gods they called for. It was her. She stayed up through the night, cooling fevers, calming fears. She didn't wear armor, but she fought anyway, against disease, despair, and sometimes even death. With tenderness, with the patience of someone who knew that healing is as much about love as it is about remedies. She was the silent warrior, the healer of the household. Part 2, Childbirth and Caring for Children. From the boring but tender tales of medieval life. Yes, childbirth. One of the most sacred, and let's be honest, perilous roles bestowed upon women throughout history. In the Middle Ages, giving birth was not exactly the rosy, softly lit event we might imagine today. There were no sterile delivery rooms, no specialized doctors in crisp white coats, and certainly no epidurals. No, childbirth back then often took place right at home. And by home, we mean a wooden cottage with questionable insulation and perhaps a curious chicken wandering nearby. The ones assisting? Not doctors, but the wise old women of the village, veterans of many births, who had seen more than their fair share of pain, joy, and slippery surprises. Take Anya, for example. Anya endured her labors with nothing but grit, perhaps a rag to bite down on, and the occasional soothing chant murmured by the midwife. Each birth was a trial of endurance, and yet she persisted, with quiet strength and unwavering resilience. But once the baby arrived, the real adventure began. Mothers had to feed their newborns, keep them warm, and protect them from the many dangers of medieval life, which unfortunately included everything from fevers to superstitions. They had to recognize when a child's cough was just a little cough, and when it meant something far more troubling. And then came the teaching. Yes, from the very first coo and crawl, it was the mother who taught the child how to speak, how to walk, and how to be a decent little human in a world that wasn't always kind. Through lullabies whispered by candlelight, and tales of saints and sleeping dragons, she passed down lessons of love, courage, and morality. These stories, while simple, were more than just bedtime fillers. They were the soul-nourishing wisdom of 1,000 generations, wrapped in rhyme and rhythm, carried on the soft breath of a mother's voice. In a society where men were often away, tilling the fields, mending the fences, or charging into battle, it was the women who stayed close to the hearth, who stayed close to the children, who molded minds, shaped hearts, and quietly raised the next generation. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in, spare a gentle thought for the Anyas of the past, for the mothers who did it all, without manuals, without machines, and certainly without a nap. Now, breathe in slowly. And as we move to the next chapter, feel free to let your eyelids grow a little heavier. Part 3. Cleanliness and Public Health. A medieval tale of soap, sweepings, and saintly patience. Now, dear listener, let us tiptoe quietly into another chapter of our gentle journey through medieval life. This time, we peek into a world not often sung about in epic ballads or noble tales, the world of cleanliness and public health. Yes, I know. It's not exactly knights and dragons. But stay with me, there's warmth and wisdom here too. And perhaps a dash of medieval mischief. You see, in the Middle Ages the idea of hygiene, both personal and public, was rather different from what we know today. Clean water wasn't something you could simply summon from a faucet. Public latrines, if they existed at all, were often, well, let's just say less than ideal. And yet, within these humble, sometimes smelly surroundings, there were heroes. Quiet heroes. Everyday heroes. And many of them were women. Take Anya, for instance. A gentle soul with calloused hands and an iron will. It was her daily duty to do the family's laundry, not in a cozy room with a humming washing machine, but at the riverbank or beside a trickling stream, where frogs croaked and breezes carried the scent of wet wool. Her detergent? Why, a rustic blend of animal fat and fireplace ash. Not quite your modern lavender-scented formula, but it got the job done. And more than just clean clothes, Anya's efforts helped prevent the spread of illness. In her own quiet way, she was a frontline worker of her time. And it didn't end there. She was also the guardian of the family's drinking water, making sure it came from the cleanest source they could find. No easy task in a world where wells could be murky and streams unpredictable. Back home the cleaning continued. The house might have been simple, a dirt floor, a wooden table, perhaps a smoky hearth, but Anya kept it in order. She swept. She scrubbed. She tidied. Not because anyone demanded it, but because she understood that even small acts of care could keep her loved ones healthy. And then, there were the elders. You see, medieval families often lived together across generations. And it was usually the woman of the house, like Anya, who cared for the elderly. She cooked for them, helped them bathe, sat by their beds when they were ill. She listened to their stories again and again, even when she'd heard them 100 times before. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't earn medals. But it took great patience, gentle strength, and a heart as warm as the fire she kept burning day after day. So the next time someone tells you the Middle Ages were all about sword fights and royal intrigue, you might gently remind them of Anya, the quiet warrior of water, ash, and care. And now, dear listener, Take a slow breath. Let that image of a peaceful riverside and the sound of sweeping brooms lull you deeper into rest. The tale continues, but only when you're ready. Part 4, The Quiet Power of Care. And so we come to a part of history that doesn't involve kings or castles, but something far more enduring. Throughout her life, the medieval woman gave everything she had, her strength, her patience, and her boundless love, to care for those around her. She wasn't just hardworking, though heavens, she worked harder than a blacksmith during tax season. She was the quiet guardian of life and health, not just for her family but often for her entire village. Her knowledge of herbs and healing? Well, it didn't come from a university. It came from whispered wisdom passed down by grandmothers and neighbors, through stories told by candlelight. No degrees were involved, but somehow that chamomile tea still did the trick. And those odd-smelling poultices? Surprisingly effective. Her child-rearing skills weren't learned from parenting books. They hadn't been invented yet. But she rocked cradles with a rhythm older than time, and soothed fevers with hands that knew the difference between a chill and something serious, even without Google. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman. But her contributions to the health and survival of her community? Far from ordinary. Each herbal brew she prepared, each lullaby she hummed, each tender moment beside a sickbed, was a quiet testament to her resilience and her compassion. Can you feel it? That strength hidden in the simplest of things? In a sprig of thyme, in a gentle hush of a lullaby, in the warm touch of care offered freely and without fanfare. It wasn't just work, it was love and hope, poured into every gesture, from one woman to the people she called family. And now let us gently wander into Chapter 6, Life in the Village. Ah yes, the village. That charming little world where everyone knows everyone, sometimes a little too well. Here we take a quiet stroll through the social lives of women in the village, who, it turns out, were the true architects of community. They didn't just stay within the walls of their homes, oh no. They were out and about, lending a hand to neighbors, sharing a laugh over fences, exchanging recipes, or perhaps just a bit of friendly gossip. Strictly for cultural research, of course. These women weren't just caretakers of their own families. They were living bridges of tradition, storytellers, and guardians of everyday wisdom. They nurtured the young not only with food and lullabies, but with values and tales passed from one generation to the next. In many ways, the heart of the village beat to the rhythm of their footsteps, soft, steady, and deeply rooted. So, as you close your eyes and imagine those gentle village lanes and warm voices in the air, know that the world these women created was simple, kind, and full of quiet strength. And isn't that a lovely thought to fall asleep to? Part 1, Village Bonds and Social Ties. Or how medieval women mastered the art of chatting while churning butter. Life for a woman in the Middle Ages wasn't confined to the four walls of her cottage. No. While the hearth was her base, the real magic happened beyond it. She was the thread that wove families, neighbors, and entire communities together. Think of her not just as a homemaker, but as the village's unofficial ambassador of goodwill, and occasional gossip correspondent. Picture a market day. Our friend Anya, basket in hand, walks alongside other women from the village, each carrying homemade treasures. Fresh eggs, creamy butter, wheels of cheese, hand-woven cloth, and bundles of fragrant herbs. The marketplace was not just for trade, it was their version of social media. There they exchanged news, stories, recipes, and maybe even a little harmless rumor, spoken softly, of course, behind a polite smile. It wasn't all haggling and herb selling. Riverbanks turned into open-air laundry lounges where women scrubbed and rinsed while catching up on whose cow had escaped again. Forest paths echoed with laughter as they foraged for berries or firewood together. And during harvest, the fields became lively with chatter and shared labor. These were not chores but opportunities, excuses really, to connect. When misfortune struck, perhaps a bad harvest or someone fell ill, the village didn't just sigh and carry on. They showed up. And leading the charge? The women. Carrying warm soup, helping with chores, and offering comfort. Sometimes the best medicine wasn't a potion from the apothecary, but a neighbor with a kind heart and a loaf of bread. But their influence didn't stop there. These women were also the quiet educators of the next generation, passing down values like kindness, respect, and filial piety. Through bedtime stories, gentle scolding, and wise proverbs, they shaped little humans into responsible medieval citizens. So, while kings and knights often get the spotlight in the history books, let's not forget the women who kept the village ticking. One batch of cheese, one fireside tale, and one heartfelt hug at a time. Part 2. Joining in the festivals and rituals. A soft tale from a time when life moved at the pace of a plow. Life in the Middle Ages wasn't all toil and turnips. There were moments, bright, joyful little moments, when work paused and the villagers gathered for something truly sacred, a good celebration. Yes, beyond the muddy fields and creaky wooden floors, there were festivals and rituals. And the women? Oh, the women were at the heart of it all. Take Anya, for example. A mother of 2 with a strong back and a stronger spirit. She, along with her children, would eagerly await the great festivals, Christmas, Easter, or perhaps a humble harvest celebration when the barns were finally full and the wheat had stopped misbehaving. These were days of color and warmth. They would decorate their little wooden home with whatever nature offered, pine, flowers, ribbons if they were lucky. Anya would cook traditional dishes with recipes passed down through stories rather than scrolls, and everyone would sing folk songs, slightly off-key but full of joy. They truly believed that by taking part in these rituals, by singing, dancing, cooking, and laughing, they could invite blessings into their home. Good health, a full belly, a peaceful winter, simple dreams, but beautiful ones. At the village square, women like Anya would also lead the way in organizing games and dances. They'd wear their finest clothes, usually the cleanest dress with the least amount of mending, and they would spin and twirl with delight, if only to forget, just for a while, the endless chores waiting back home. These celebrations weren't just for amusement. They were a quiet kind of prayer, an expression of hope, unity, and faith. Faith in each other. In the land. In the gods, or God, depending on which century we're talking about. And then, of course, there were the more solemn occasions. Weddings, funerals, times when joy and grief walked hand in hand. Women once again were the keepers of tradition. They prepared meals, arranged flowers, lit candles, and, most importantly, offered comfort. Their presence, like a warm blanket in winter, wrapped around the community. In this way they wove together something much deeper than garlands or dances. They created a quiet strength, a spiritual web of support that held everyone close. Through harvests and hunger, through birth and loss. And so, in the echo of bells or the laughter of children, you can still hear them, those medieval women, dancing, singing, carrying on. Part 3. Bedtime Stories and the Passing Down of Knowledge. And now, dear listener, as the night falls gently like a woolen blanket across the land, let us return to a simpler time, a quieter time. After a long day filled with labor, feeding the animals, mending torn sleeves, chasing chickens, and possibly even chasing children, something magical would happen. The woman of the house, tired but warm-hearted, would become something more than a caretaker. She would become the storyteller. By the gentle crackle of the hearth, as embers danced their sleepy orange ballet, she would gather the little ones close. And then, with a voice both soft and wise, she would begin. Tales of ancient gods, mischievous spirits, saints who walked barefoot through storms, and village legends passed down like cherished recipes. These were no mere bedtime stories. No, they were lessons cleverly disguised as entertainment. Through these stories the children learned courage, not the kind found in battle, but the quiet courage to do what is right when no one is looking. They learned fairness, not the kind you argue about, but the kind you feel deep in your chest. And above all, they learned love. Gentle, enduring, and woven into everything. But storytelling didn't stop at morals. Oh no, it was a full-blown school by the firelight. Anya, for instance, would tell her daughter about herbs that healed more than just coughs, plants that soothed fevers, calmed nerves, or made your neighbor's stew slightly better than yours. She taught her which roots to dig, which leaves to dry, and which berries to absolutely never eat, unless one fancied a dramatic trip to the village healer. To her son she taught the language of the land. How to read the soil like a book. How the wind whispered about coming rains. When to plant. When to wait. And how to tell one kind of dirt from another without eating it, an underrated skill. These were not things one could find in a scroll or written on parchment. No, this was the knowledge of hands, of heart, of centuries. Passed not in ink but in breath. You see, these women weren't just mothers or wives. They were keepers of the flame, keepers of tradition, guardians of memory. They didn't just raise children. They shaped souls. And quietly, gently, almost without anyone noticing, they carried the culture of a people forward, like a soft song humming through time. What a treasure that is. And now, as you drift ever so slowly toward sleep, perhaps you'll carry one of their stories with you too. Part 4, The Circle of Life, and a Dash of Resilience. As we gently turn back the pages of time and peek into the daily life of medieval village women, one thing becomes as clear as a church bell on a quiet morning. They were never truly alone. These women lived within a circle. Not the kind you draw in the dirt with a stick, though they probably did that too. No, this was the great circle of life, woven from shared bread, whispered secrets, gentle hands, and warm fires. They weren't just wives or mothers. They were friends. They were sisters. They were neighbors. Sometimes all of those things before breakfast. And their strength? It wasn't just in their calloused hands or sun-kissed foreheads. It was in their togetherness. They worked side by side, sang while spinning, and laughed in the face of famine. Because what else could you do, really? Through storms and seasons they carried on, quietly, courageously, keeping the fire of love, hope, and simple, stubborn survival alive. Not with grand gestures but with small, steady acts of care. Now, their labor may not be recorded in golden ink or stone tablets. But their legacy? Oh, it's still with us. You can hear it in a lullaby, soft as wool and twice as warm. You can see it in old fairy tales passed from grandmother to grandchild. You can feel it in the values we still hold dear, the ones whispered through generations like treasured recipes. They were ordinary women, yes. But their impact? Anything but. Can you feel it now? That quiet power? It lingers in the echo of the chapel bell, in the giggles of children playing by the stream, in the gentle voice that tells stories when the moon is high and the hearth still glows. This wasn't just survival. It was love. It was hope. It was a woman's heart, beating gently but firmly, for her people, her place, and her time. So rest easy now. You're in good company. And now let us quietly drift into Chapter 7, From Peasant to Noblewoman. Picture this, two women both living in the same medieval world, but worlds apart. One, a sturdy peasant woman with strong hands and a sun-kissed face. The other, a noble lady with silks, perfumes, and probably a very bored lapdog. Their daily lives? As different as barley soup and roasted pheasant. The peasant woman wakes with the rooster, every day. She tends the fire, the children, the animals, the garden, the laundry, and occasionally her equally tired husband. Her hands never rest. Her back never truly straightens. The noblewoman? She rises a little later, perhaps when the sunlight filters gently through stained glass windows. She manages estates, writes letters sealed with wax, hosts guests who speak in polite riddles, and sometimes, just sometimes, plays a quiet role in the delicate dance of politics. Yes, despite the luxuries, even noble women had their own burdens to carry. Their responsibilities were grand, yet inescapable, from overseeing vast lands to making alliances over dinner. Different as day and night. Yet both, in their own quiet ways, held power. And both, like all women of their time, were expected to keep everything running, gracefully. Part 1. The World of Noblewomen. Storytelling for sleep, with a hint of history and a dash of humor. Now then, we've already wandered through the fields and muddy paths of medieval life, exploring the hard, back-breaking days of peasant women. Quite the workout for the imagination, wasn't it? But tonight, let's take a different turn. Let's step into the stone corridors and velvet-draped halls of the castle. Yes, the world of noblewomen. Surely it must have been easier, right? Well, not exactly. Behind those cold stone walls and beneath those elegant, flowing gowns were lives full of duty, responsibility, and the quiet pressure of keeping up appearances. Their days looked different, certainly. But in truth, these noble ladies carried just as much, if not more, on their beautifully adorned shoulders. Picture this. A countess named Eleanor. She lives in a grand castle with towering battlements and tapestries that probably took 3 years to weave. Eleanor doesn't till the land or milk the goats, but don't be fooled, she's no idle lady. She runs an entire estate. Hundreds of people depend on her decisions. Eleanor manages the finances, oversees the servants, hosts feasts and festivals with the grace of a swan, or at least she tries. She also handles trade, buying and selling precious goods like silk, spices, and jewels that glitter just enough to distract from all the stress. Running a medieval estate, it turns out, is a bit like running a very large, very drafty business. She needs sharp wit, sharper math skills, and diplomacy worthy of a queen. She has to ensure that taxes are collected, conflicts are resolved, and nobody is sneaking an extra slice of pie from the kitchen. And though she has servants, yes, plenty of them, Eleanor is still expected to manage every detail of the household. The food must be just right. The clothes must be stitched with care. And the children? Educated, well-mannered, and ideally not swinging swords indoors. She's not just a lady. She's a CEO in brocade. A master of ceremonies. A quiet force behind the smooth running of everything within those castle walls. So yes, while her hands might be free of dirt and calluses, her mind is always ticking. Because being a noble woman wasn't about sitting pretty. It was about standing strong, gracefully of course, while holding up a very complicated world. Now take a slow breath in and out, and let the candlelight of Eleanor's castle guide you gently toward rest. Part 2, Education and Political Alliances. Boring History for Sleep, Gentle Edition. Now, dear listener, as we settle into the softer pages of the past, let's turn our attention to something rather refined, education, and, of course, a touch of noble politics. Don't worry, no need to sit up straight or take notes. Just breathe slowly and let the medieval world unfold. One of the biggest differences between peasant women and noble women wasn't the size of their castles or how many petticoats they owned. Though, admittedly, that did matter too. No, the true divide was in education. Noble women, unlike their peasant counterparts, often learned to read and write. Some even dabbled in foreign languages, because nothing says upper class quite like writing a letter in Latin while sipping spiced wine. These women were taught history, religion, and the arts. Not just to pass the time with poetry and prayers, but to prepare them for a surprisingly complex role in society. A well-educated lady could read important letters, manage estates, and perhaps most intriguingly, offer political advice to her husband. Yes, even in armor-clad medieval times, behind every powerful lord, there was likely a lady quietly steering the conversation. Take Eleanor, for instance. She wasn't just a wife or a mother. No. She was her husband's most trusted advisor. When politics grew thorny or battles loomed on the horizon, Eleanor's voice carried weight. And that weight? It often tipped the scales. Marriage in those days was rarely about love and long walks through the orchard. More often it was strategic. A noblewoman's hand in marriage could forge alliances, unite kingdoms, and secure peace, at least until the next banquet brawl. And raising children? Oh, noble mothers took it very seriously. Tutors were hired, not just any tutors but the best money and influence could buy. Their children learned everything from Latin verbs to proper posture at royal dinners. Daughters were trained to manage estates and be graceful hostesses, while sons were prepped for the battlefield and someday for leadership. Social life in noble circles was, well, let's say layered. Balls, feasts, religious ceremonies, and those never-ending banquets. It wasn't just fun and games, it was politics with a side of roast boar. Noble women had to be charming, intelligent, and endlessly diplomatic. A misplaced word could lose a land grant. A well-placed compliment? That could win an ally for life. These women were the hidden web of power behind their family's status. They cultivated relationships like a gardener tends roses, carefully, patiently, and sometimes with thorns. And now, as you drift gently through the halls of memory and moonlit castles, imagine the quiet power of a woman in velvet, holding a goblet of wine, listening intently and thinking, perhaps tomorrow we'll speak with the Duke. Part 3. Embroidery and the gentle art of doing very refined things. Now, just because noble women weren't out plowing fields or hauling firewood doesn't mean their days were idle. Oh no, far from it. They had their own kind of labor, quieter, more delicate, and thoroughly stitched with meaning. One of the highest forms of such noble handiwork? Embroidery. Yes, embroidery, an art where a woman could spend hours, and we do mean hours, hunched over fine fabric, turning tiny threads into grand scenes. Picture Eleanor sitting gracefully in her private chamber, needle in hand, the sun filtering through stained glass as she slowly stitched a tale of saints and angels. Or perhaps a jolly hunting scene, complete with dogs, deer, and men in tights. But these weren't just decorative pieces. No, these tapestries and embroidered garments were expressions of talent, creativity, and, believe it or not, deep inner life. You see, in a world where women were expected to be quiet, modest, and, well, preferably invisible, needle and thread became tools of expression. Through careful stitches and whispered patterns, noble women told the stories they couldn't say out loud. Hopes, fears, dreams of something more. A longing for love, or maybe just a better embroidery hoop. These pieces were often preserved, passed down through generations. A kind of stitched diary, really. No passwords, no cloud backups, just honest thread. And if embroidery wasn't enough, well, there were other refined pursuits. Playing an instrument, perhaps. Singing sweet songs in the garden. Or painting delicate flowers in notebooks no one would ever read. It wasn't just for fun. Though, let's be honest, a lute solo now and then could really liven up a Wednesday. These were ways to show grace, elegance, and the cultural polish expected of a lady of the court. In truth, these women, so often hidden behind curtains and customs, were the quiet guardians of art. With every stitch and note and brushstroke, they nurtured beauty in a world that sorely needed it. So the next time you see a medieval tapestry, give a little nod. Somewhere, Eleanor is smiling, needle in hand, perfectly content. Part 4, Grace and Resilience. Now, as we gently turn the page and glance back at the lives of noble women from days long past, we might be tempted to think, how easy their lives must have been. After all, they had silk gowns, glittering jewels, and grand halls echoing with harp music. But let's not be fooled by the embroidery and the porcelain. Though they didn't toil in the fields or carry buckets up steep hills, these women bore burdens of a different kind, responsibilities that stretched far beyond the walls of their stately manors. Political alliances, estate management, social duties, and yes, the occasional dramatic family feud. They were the quiet architects behind castles and kingdoms, weaving threads of diplomacy and strategy into their daily lives with the same finesse they used in their embroidery hoops. It wasn't brute strength they wielded, but a quiet resilience, one that battled not the beasts of the forest, but the expectations of society. They fought not with swords but with words, wit, and unwavering grace. You can almost feel it, can't you? Their strength, hidden in every letter they penned by candlelight, in every tapestry that told a story without words, in every firm yet gentle decision that shaped generations to come. This was not just a life of leisure. It was a life of love, leadership, and a deep devotion to family and community. Beautiful, isn't it? And now, as you settle deeper into your blanket cocoon, we invite you to drift gently into Chapter 8, Their Legacy, where we'll bring this tale to a close with a heartfelt call to action. But don't worry, we'll keep the pace slow, the tone soft, and the story just boring enough to help you fall asleep with a smile. And now let us quietly drift into Chapter 8, Their Legacy. This final chapter is like the soft closing of a very old, dusty book, one that's been on the shelf for far too long, waiting patiently to be remembered. Here we gently gather the threads of everything we've discovered about the women of the Middle Ages. Their lives may not have made the headlines, or the illuminated manuscripts, but their hands were steady in shaping society and culture in ways both subtle and profound. We'll take one last peaceful look at the paths they walked, the wisdom they carried, and the strength they held, often behind the scenes, but never without significance. By the end of this chapter, perhaps we'll find a quiet appreciation for these often forgotten contributors to history, and maybe, just maybe, fall asleep a little wiser. Part 1. The Quiet Strength of Resilience. Now, as we gently drift back in time, Let us take a slow, peaceful stroll through the winding paths of the medieval world, not to meet kings or knights or dragons, but to visit someone far more impressive. The women who lived, loved, and labored in the shadows of history. From humble peasant girls to noble countesses, their lives were stitched together with threads of patience, persistence, and an awful lot of mud. Yes, life in the Middle Ages was no fairy tale. There were no warm showers or fluffy duvets. Just cold stone floors, endless chores, and, if you were lucky, a goat that didn't bite. But still, there was something extraordinary about these women. Something quietly powerful. Something we might call resilience. Take Anya, the peasant woman. With hands rougher than bark and a back strong as an old oak, she turned clumps of tired earth into food, and tufts of wool into warm clothes. She didn't wield a sword, but she was a warrior all the same. A silent protector of her family, fighting daily battles against hunger, cold, and sometimes very stubborn chickens. Her life was a quiet epic, a ballad of labor, a poem of sacrifice. Now let's glide over to the other end of the social ladder, to someone like Lady Eleanor. Yes, Eleanor. Graceful, intelligent, and likely very tired of embroidery. She didn't hoe fields, but she managed vast estates. She didn't churn butter, but she churned political alliances. With a keen mind and a delicate hand, she helped keep the fragile piece of her world intact. Eleanor's strength wasn't in muscle, but in strategy, in calm decision-making, in late-night letters sealed with wax and ambition. Her life was an epic too, one of intellect and quiet determination. Now, dear listener, whether they wore wooden clogs or velvet gowns, whether they milked cows or signed treaties, these women shared one thing. They were keepers of life's fire, guardians of love, of survival, and of hope. They were never center stage, but without them the stage would have crumbled. So tonight, let's honor them in the stillness. As you close your eyes, think of Anya and Eleanor, and let their strength, their softness, and their unwavering spirits carry you gently into rest. Part 2. Their legacy in modern life. Now, let's drift a little deeper into something quite beautiful and surprisingly familiar. You see, their contributions didn't just stay in the dusty pages of history. Oh no, they quietly live on, right in our kitchens, our closets, and even in the herbal teas we sip when we've got a tickle in our throat. Have you ever stopped and wondered, where did that warm, crusty loaf of bread you had this morning come from? Or the soft fabric of your favorite pajamas? Or even that old folk remedy your grandmother swears by, the one involving mint, honey, and just a hint of mysterious leaf? Well, my friend, much of it leads back to the women of the medieval world. These women, often unseen and unheard in grand historical epics, were quietly shaping the very foundations of daily life. They passed down bread-making secrets long before sourdough became trendy. They wove, stitched, and dyed fabrics with such skill that it would make any modern-day fashion designer pause in awe. And they knew plants, not just for flavor but for healing, soothing, and nurturing. They were the original chefs, herbalists, weavers, and caretakers of tradition. They didn't just do the work, they started it. So the next time you savor a delicious homemade meal, perhaps pause for a moment. Picture a medieval woman bent over a fire, crafting something simple but filled with care. And when you see an embroidered tablecloth or a detailed piece of fabric art, remember the women who once sat for hours by candlelight, weaving not just thread, but love, creativity, and patience into every stitch. Their legacy may not be written in marble or sung in battle songs, but it lives in the quiet things, the resilient, the tender, the endlessly creative. It lives in warmth, in kindness, in the gentle, enduring strength of those who loved and labored, not for glory, but for life itself. Part 3. The closing words, the quiet power of women. And so, as our journey gently draws to a close, we find ourselves reflecting on a world that often goes unnoticed. A world held together not by kings or knights, but by the steady, invisible hands of women. They didn't hold political power. They didn't command armies or win great battles. But oh, they wielded something far more enduring. The power of life itself, and love and care. Every woman, whether a humble peasant or a noble lady in a drafty castle, carried within her a story. A quiet story of resilience, of sacrifice, and of the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. They were mothers, wives, sisters, daughters. The ones who stirred the pot, patched the clothes, and somehow kept the whole medieval world from falling apart. Ordinary women, yes. But their contributions? Far from ordinary. So tonight, as you rest your head and drift into sleep, perhaps let your dreams wander to those quiet heroines, who never asked to be remembered, but surely deserve to be. Good night, dear listener, and thank you for joining me. Part 4, a gentle call to action. And now, as you slowly drift closer to sleep, take just a quiet moment to reflect on the story we've shared. Think of the women who, through history and into today, have quietly nurtured the world, without fanfare, without applause. Let's not forget that, in our lives, it's often the simplest, smallest things that carry the deepest meaning. If this story touched something in your heart, go ahead and leave a gentle little like. Maybe even a comment. Share how you feel. Or, share this story with a woman you love. And if you'd like more tales like this, soft, soulful, and a little sleepy, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next cozy corner of history we uncover together. Thank you so much for listening. Wishing you a peaceful night, and the sweetest of dreams. We'll meet again in another episode.